All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. The title of this webinar is Borrowing for College Without Going Broke. This is a webinar that's going to be specifically targeted to a discussion about borrowing money for school. And I'm also going to talk about a couple of different tips for loan strategies, as well as sort of my philosophy on paying for college. Feel free to post any questions into the chat function. I will be posting this meeting or this webinar online on my YouTube channel when I'm done, and you can always find the link to it on my website, www.informedcollegeconsumer.com. So let's go ahead and get started. So just for a few minutes, I want to talk about a little about who I am. I'm the owner and financial planner at Inspiration Financial Planning. It's a fee-only financial planning firm I started a couple of years ago. I've got an MBA, and I spent the first 15 years of my career in information technology at various companies. I've always been interested in personal finance, and I'm very, very passionate about providing unbiased information in a fiduciary capacity. So that means I'm not beholden to any company. I don't sell any products, and I really wanted to do this webinar for folks because as in a few minutes, as you'll see, the student loan problem is really starting to take over the news and become more prevalent, where people are borrowing too much for school and they're getting themselves into financial trouble. So a little bit about the state of student loans today. Every second, America's student loan debt grows by $2,726. And this is really, it's becoming another bubble, like the real estate crisis in 2008, and it needs to be addressed. Unfortunately, all I can do is help one family at a time from borrowing too much, and so that's what I'm here to start helping you guys with tonight. So in the last 5 years, we've amassed more student loan debt than in all the years combined since the federal student loan programs began more than 50 years ago. And that, again, this is a problem. I'm sorry. Student loan balances have tripled in the last 10 years, from 500 billion to 1.4 billion. So what's driving this? The good and the bad is that student loans are incredibly easy to get. There are a lot of banks out there that are very willing to loan money that can't be bankrupted. Most student loan borrowing programs are programs where you can't dismiss those loans in bankruptcy. And parents are making emotional decisions about colleges and are very often willing to do anything to send their child to their preferred school. The problem with all of this is that too much easy money has driven tuition prices ever higher. And it's a vicious cycle, just like housing was 10 years ago. So I want to talk a little bit about the big picture, and I often compare paying for college to shopping for a home. And for those of you who are familiar with basketball, this is Michael Jordan's house, or his old house, I guess, in Lake Forest, I think it was. And ask yourself, would you shop for a home that you can't afford? Would you go looking at houses that are $2 million when your budget is $300,000? Unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do today with shopping for colleges. And then the disappointment comes in when your child finds a school that they really love, and you find out that the price tag of that school is really unaffordable for your family and your financial picture. So I recommend a two-step process for college planning and thinking about paying for college. Before you even get to how much should you borrow, it's, can you afford to help at all? Are your own finances solid? Do you have an emergency fund? Are you saving for retirement? And do you have excess cash flow? If the answers to all of these are no, then you need to think about how you can help your child with their college choice and making smart choices, and maybe not on the monetary side, or maybe they live with you and you're not able to contribute monetarily, but you can contribute in other ways. So really you have to start on the left side here and figure out if you can afford to help. And then what's your strategy after that? So thinking about your affordability and how much have you saved for college? Have you saved anything over the time that your child was younger? Can you contribute cash flow out of your pocket during the years that your child's in school? And then are there other sources that you can put into that affordability picture, like money from grandparents or scholarships, or perhaps your child has savings or they can get a summer job? And then the final piece of that picture are student loans. And I really advocate a reasonable amount after all of these other things have been considered. And we'll talk at the very end what's a reasonable amount. So what I'm here to do is to review all your options for borrowing money for college. I want to talk about the pros and cons to each one of those options, and again, get you to think twice about borrowing too much and answer your questions. So I'm hoping that the slide presentation portion of this will only go about maybe 25 or 30 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Or during, if you have any questions during, please feel free to post them in the chat function. So let's start at the basics, talking about the different kinds of loans and borrowing options that are out there. So I start here on the left side with loans that are basically part of the federal government programs. There's the direct subsidized version, and that's need-based. There is the federal direct unsubsidized version, which everybody who fills out the FAFSA can qualify for. And that's why I really recommend that all families fill out the FAFSA, because then you have access to those federal direct unsubsidized loans. There's Perkins loans, which we're not going to talk a whole lot about tonight, again, because those are need-based and they're given by the school. So they're school specific and they're really based on extraordinary need. And then there's the Direct Plus loan program, and those are parent loans. All of the others are student ones that your student signs for, whereas the Direct Plus loan is for parents. In the middle here, you've got private student loans, and these are really offered straight from banks. And there's a variety of different programs here. A lot of schools have banks that they partner with to do private student loans. We'll talk a little bit more about those. And then on the right side are sort of all of the other options. You can certainly borrow from home equity. You can borrow against insurance policies that might have a cash value. You could borrow from retirement accounts. You could borrow from credit cards or personal loan options. And I'll delve into a little bit more about sort of maybe the pros and cons of each one of those options and why you might not want to do some of them. Okay, so let's dive into the federal loan program. So again, I mentioned that there's two types here. There's the subsidized version, and then there's the unsubsidized version. On the subsidized side, those are need-based. Again, you have to fill out the FAFSA and be determined to have need, which means that it only means that the college, the amount that it costs to attend that school, your estimated family contribution is lower than that attendance amount. They're available to undergraduate students, and the subsidized piece of it means that the U.S. Department of Education pays the interest while your child is in school and during grace periods and deferments, which is great because you borrow the money, you graduate from school, and then once you start making repayment, that's when you're responsible for the interest. On the unsubsidized side, they're not need-based. So again, everybody who fills out the FAFSA can qualify for these. They're available to undergraduate students or professional students. So these for graduate students could use these as well. The unsubsidized means that you or your child, not the government, pay interest while they are in school. And if you don't pay that interest while they're in school, it will accumulate on top of the principal balance, and it's called capitalization, and it will mean that when you graduate, you've got more in principal to pay off. So I really highly recommend trying to pay the interest while your child is in school. Again, this is one of the ways that you can contribute if you're not able to contribute through cash flow or money that you might have saved. Okay, so here's a little bit more details on this program, and this is only for dependent students. Independent students have different loan limits, and so I'm not going to cover those here, but they are slightly higher. But dependent students, those ones that are claimed on their parents' tax return, are dependent students, and there's a couple of other questions. Each year there's a maximum of what students can borrow. So for freshman year, it's $5,500, and I'm pretty sure that this amount has not changed since I was in college. It's not as much as you might think, and no more than $3,500 of that amount may be subsidized. So even if you are eligible for need-based aid, only $3,500 of it may be subsidized. The other $2,000 would be unsubsidized. So sophomore year, that goes up slightly. It's $6,500 with a maximum of $4,500 in subsidized. And then junior year and beyond, which means junior, senior, and maybe year 5, the max is $7,500. Now, there is also a cumulative limit on these loans of $31,000. So if you do the math and you borrow the maximum in the first 4 years, that's $27,000. You don't get $7,500 that 5th year. You only get $4,000. So it's really important to graduate in 4 years. But it's also, if you do go on for a 5th and a 6th year, you can't depend on having these direct loans available to you any longer, not at the maximum amounts. There's a grace period of 6 months after you leave school before repayment begins. That gives your student time to have get a job, maybe move back home if they need to, or find an apartment, and get their budget ready to start paying these loans. And we'll talk a little bit about an estimate of what the payment might look like. And all of these loans have a fee, and this is part of the downside of them. It's deducted from the amount you get, and it's approximately 1% right now. So if you're borrowing $5,500, they're going to take $55 off the top. The benefit of this loan is it has lower interest rates. Right now it's 3.76% annually, and that's changed each year as new loans come in, and they have a lot of flexible repayment options. So are there any questions yet on the federal direct loans? Remember, if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself or you can post it into the chat function. All right, so let's talk about my least favorite option for borrowing money for college. The Parent Plus loans. They're available to parents of dependent undergraduate students, and the parents must be approved with a good credit history. Now, this is not an onerous process. They do, unlike a mortgage or other kinds of borrowing, they do not check if you have an ability to pay back the loans because they can't be bankrupted. And you can certainly borrow more than you can afford to under this program. You can borrow up to the total cost of attendance less any financial aid. So if your child wants to go to a school that costs $65,000 a year and they get zero financial aid, you can borrow $65,000 a year. So if you look at 4 years, that's over $250,000. If you look at 5 years, which the majority of kids right now are not graduating in 4 years, you're looking at over $300,000. That's a lot of money to borrow to send your kid to school. So you really have to think about this. The interest accrues and is capitalized if you don't pay it while the child is in school. So it starts accruing immediately. If you don't pay it, it is capitalized. And again, by the time your child graduates, you have a significantly higher principal balance. Now, the repayment for parents may be deferred, but again, your balance is continuing to grow during this time. And there is a loan fee as well, and it is 4.276%. So on that same $5,500, you're going to pay over $200 in a loan fee, deducted immediately from this disbursement amount. So these are not a good option if you need to borrow money for short term just to cover cash flow, because you're losing over 4% right away. And the other downside to these loans is that the interest rate is currently 6.31%, which is really high in today's environment. And it is likely higher than a lot of other borrowing options that you might have. So let's talk about private loans. These are the bank loans in that middle column that we saw at the very beginning. And these are available to students and parents with good credit history. Now, the kicker with this is that students, unless they have their own significant credit history, are usually not going to be able to get these loans themselves. They're going to need a cosigner. And typically that's the parents. And so it's great when your child says, oh yeah, I'll pay it back after school. But if they don't get a job, they can't pay their loans, then they're on you. And you need to understand that when you're co-signing for private loans. Again, these are not need-based, so you can borrow up to the cost of attendance. They can be variable or fixed interest and a rate that's usually higher than the direct student loans, but it can sometimes be lower than the Parent Plus loans. These have no grace period. You start paying them back right away. And the fees on these vary by lender. So typically schools have a list of approved lenders on their financial aid website. I know that Discover Bank offers student loan, or Discover credit cards offer student loans. There's other banks that offer student loans. You may have your local bank that is offering student loan. Again, everybody loves to offer these loans because they can't be bankrupted. Any questions on those? Okay, so let's talk through some of your other options. So let's start with home equity loans or lines of credit. This is a very popular option. It was even more popular in the real estate boom when home values were going up and up and up, and parents were continuing to have more and more equity in their homes. But if you do have equity in your home, you can borrow that equity and pay for your student's school. Typically, the interest rates are lower than maybe some of the other options out there. On a line of credit, you could just pull out the amount that you need each semester, which is good. That keeps your total interest cost over time lower. The interest could be tax deductible depending on your tax situation. So it does have some positives. The negatives are that, if something happens and you can't pay that, instead of just having a loan that's not secured by anything, you could lose your home because you can't pay money that you borrowed to send your child to school. And the worst of all scenarios is where the child borrows a lot of money to go to school, or you borrow a lot of money to send them to school, and they don't graduate and they can't pay their loans. And then you're stuck to pay your loans and maybe their loans if you're going to try to help them out that way.
I don't know if anybody else lost the screen.
Yeah, it's gone.
I can't. Yeah, I can't see the slides. I don't know if it's my computer, if something happened. I don't know if anybody else.
Is anyone else having trouble seeing the slides?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, I guess it's just my computer. I'm gonna mute now.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Like I said, this will be posted on YouTube after probably tomorrow. And I can also, send you any slides that you might have missed. So let me know. Just email me.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next option on here are insurance policy loans, and this is it's a very popular strategy for a lot of college planning folks out there. 95% of people who call themselves college financial planners sell insurance. I'm not one of them, and I really I think that what they do is a disservice to families because the vast majority of families don't benefit from purchasing these policies. But if you already have an insurance policy that has a cash value, you may have options to borrow against it. So that is certainly an option. But again, the downside is if you don't pay it back, you've lost your death benefit because insurance should really be used for insurance purposes, not for funding education. And you know, I don't believe it's a very good strategy for most people to use. Retirement account loans. This is another popular strategy that folks use. If you have a Roth IRA, you do have the ability to take money out for education purposes. Some IRAs have withdrawal options to be able to withdraw money penalty free for education. And again, you are decreasing the funds available that you will have in retirement. And you're using an account that was meant to save for retirement to pay for education. And you have to ask yourself, what's the detriment to your retirement? Those next 10 to 15 years that you're losing out on that growth, it turns a $10,000 withdrawal into a $40,000 or $50,000 decrease in the available funds for retirement. So just, you may have to delay retirement. You won't be able to live the lifestyle that you wanted to live in retirement. So it's really something you have to think very long and hard about before you take that step. Credit cards or personal loans, these can have pros if you have some sort of rewards available to you through your credit card. You have to look at the fees that schools might charge you in order to use credit cards. So just keep those in mind. And oftentimes the repayment terms means you would have to pay a higher repayment on a credit card or a personal loan because it's a short-term payback period typically. So you probably have a higher payment than some of the other options that we've talked about. So while all of these are certainly options, you really have to look at it in the big picture of, again, your whole financial situation and are these taking advantage of these options going to lead to a financial problem in one of the other areas of your life? So one thing I want to address is that a long time ago, people used to say that student loan debt is good debt. And the reasons people thought that is because the interest rates were low. The interest could be tax deductible. So if you make under $85,000, I think if you're single, or 80,000, I forget what the limits are, you can deduct student loan interest. So most kids, once they graduate and they get a job, they're making 50 grand, they can deduct their student loan interest, which is great. And investing in college offered a really high payoff with a higher salary upon graduation. So that's why people used to say it was good debt. But the downside is that it can't be discharged in bankruptcy, except in very, very, very few circumstances. There's a lot of programs out there these days that are income-based repayment plans, that are public service loan forgiveness, that are teacher loan forgiveness, but that shouldn't be the plan. I wouldn't recommend borrowing $100,000 for school and then planning to get that forgiven over time, because those programs can change. It really can take your student a long, long time to get out of that debt. It's 20 years, it's 15 years, it's 25 years for some of these payment plans where you get forgiveness at the end. So while it could be considered good debt because of the points that I mentioned at the top, it's not necessarily good anymore. And the other problem is these days is so many people are borrowing for school and then they don't graduate, or it takes them 5, 6, 7 years to graduate, and that really compounds the problem. So I want to talk a little bit about how much is too much. And I really recommend thinking about the major that your child is interested in and thinking about what their projected salary looks like. So the average salaries for a bunch of popular majors here for bachelor's degrees are listed. Engineering is the highest one. Computer science and math and sciences are the top three. Education, humanities and social sciences, communications, those are all there at the bottom. So it really makes no sense for somebody who is getting an education degree to borrow at the same rate that somebody who's getting an engineering degree is borrowing at, because their ability to pay back student loans when they graduate is about half of what somebody with an engineering major will have when they graduate. So if you want to think about a couple of rules of thumb, I would say don't borrow more than the anticipated first year salary. So that if you go back here, the folks who are majoring in education don't borrow more than 35 grand. The folks that are majoring in engineering, try to keep it under 65 grand. Keep the anticipated payments to 10 to 15% of gross income. If you borrow 35 grand, your payments are going to be almost $400 a month when you graduate if you're on a standard repayment plan. If you borrow 60 grand, 65 grand, they're going to be over $700 a month. So you need to think about what that, your child needs to think about. You need to help them think about, because so many of them just sign on the dotted line and don't think about it. You need to think about what the budget looks like for that first year out of school. How much is it going to cost them to live? Do they need to buy a car? Do they need to buy furniture? Are they going to live with friends? And think about, what that payment looks like as a percentage of their gross income. Don't capitalize interest if you can pay it during school. Again, because if you capitalize interest throughout school, your principal balance when you graduate is going to be significantly higher than the amount that you originally borrowed, which will extend the time that it takes to repay it or increase your payments. Take the shortest repayment period that you can afford. I know that Navient has been in the news recently because they have been accused of steering students into longer repayment terms. If you take a 10-year loan and you turn it into a 20-year loan, you're going to pay 3 times as much interest. And that, really, while the payments are lower for those 20 years and it seems attractive, a lot of people don't add up all the extra interest that you're going to be paying over that 20 years. And only use deferment and forbearance for short-term situations. These aren't, because again, your interest is continuing to accumulate during those time periods. They're not a long-term solution. If you lose your job and you need to find a new one, that would be a great time to use one of these options. But it shouldn't be thought of, I'm going to, defer this for the next 10 years until I make a lot of money. That's just, it only postpones the problem. It kicks it down the road. So a handful of smart borrowing strategies I wanted to share with you. To start with a budget before your child even starts looking at school. So if you go back to the concept that we talked about at the very beginning on affordability, add up those numbers. What have you saved divided by 4? What can you contribute each year in cash flow? What other sources do you have? Scholarships, grandparent help. And then think about loans. So if you're only going to borrow the $5,500 in direct federal unsubsidized loans that first year, and you've got, $5,000 to contribute from cash flow, $5,000 that you've saved maybe, that's your budget. And you need to understand that if you pick a school that's $50,000 a year, you're going to be in trouble because where are you going to find that $35,000 a year to bridge that gap? It's an unfortunate reality lesson that I think a lot of kids need to learn and need to understand before they start looking at high price schools where they might not get any aid. In order to maximize your chances for getting financial aid, if you don't get need-based aid, look for schools that want your child, that where they might be in the top 25% of the incoming freshman class, they're much more likely to get merit aid at those kinds of schools. So that can increase your budget. And really think about a 4-year plan. Many people worry a lot about that first year, and they say, okay, we've got money saved, we'll just use all of that to pay for the first year, and then we'll figure out how to pay for the rest. The problem is that if you can't figure it out, then your child may have to transfer, and they may extend having to go to school 3, 4, 5 more years in order to, replace lost credits. And federal student loans are use it or lose it. So if you don't borrow that $5,500 that first year, it's not like you can borrow $11,000 the sophomore year. So if you've got money saved, use a quarter of it each year. You take the loans each year that you can for those federal direct student loans, and don't wait for years 3 and 4. Plan out how you're going to pay for this college education, in a 4-year bunch. Don't just plan for year 1. All right, so that was a lot in 30 minutes. I'm going to open it up for questions right now. So I would love to hear what your thoughts are, and if you need me to go back and go over something, I'm happy to do that. If you're on mute, then you might want to take yourself off mute or post your question in the chat.
I just wanted to say, I don't have a question, but that all of this information has been very informative. So thank you very much for taking the time to prepare this and present it to us.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the recording.